What's up guys, this is NerdBucket coming at you with another video. As you can see, we're doing things a little bit different today. In some of my videos already, I have mentioned that I do have a soft spot for handhelds because that was a big part of my life. So I figured, why not show you my handheld collections? For today's video, we are going to be only showing the official hardware stuff. So Nintendo, Sony, stuff like that, right? I do have quite a few emulation handhelds from China as well, but those will maybe show on a different video. Today we are going to be looking at only the official hardware handheld. Sad to say, a lot of these are no longer working. Even like 5 years ago, they were all working, but I was mentally and physically unavailable for quite a few years, and so I did not keep up maintenance with this. They were kept in storage, and before that I used to live by the coast where the salinity in the air was very high, so some of these have corroded from the inside, and then the heat also messed with them. So a lot of these now are sadly no longer working, and I am no longer in the financial state to be fixing them, but I do keep them around, just in case in the future I do get the time and the money to be able to fix them, because most of these do have a lot of sentimental value. So let's start. This is the very first Game Boy Color that I got. What game do I have in here? Trophy Hunter. I don't even play this, but this was the Game Boy Color that I got way back when, and this was my big buddy. You can see that there is a screen burn there. I did take out the Polaroid film there, and I was gonna exchange it, but the screen was actually burnt, and then I couldn't find a replacement for the screen back then. Especially living here in Brazil, it's a little difficult to get replacement parts from overseas, and then in here things do tend to get quite expensive, and so I never got around fixing it. But aside from the screen, everything is pretty good. I did open this to check, and everything was pretty good. The buttons are still amazing. You can see that the shell is still the stickers maybe not so much, but the shell is still quite good. I do like this color quite a bit. This was my first Game Boy and my first handheld, so this was my baby for a really long time, and who knows, maybe one day I can get a IPS kit to change out the screen, because since the board inside is still pretty good and the buttons are all good, I believe changing the screen will bring it back to life. So who knows, maybe one day, maybe not. Some of the games that I did have for it were these. Some of my favorites, of course. I have this, but this, I don't really care about this. But my absolute favorite was, of course, Mega Man Extreme. This was given to me by my best friend when he came back from the States. He did give me this, and he's always sentimental to get video games. Like back then, we didn't have a lot of access to original games here in Brazil, so friends went overseas and brought stuff like this. It was always a testament to our friendship, I guess. So very cool. I do still have this from all the way back then. Pokemon Blue also. The battery is probably not working anymore. This is from a really long time ago. There's Duke Nukem. I actually forgot the silver here. Silver was actually my brother's, and blue was mine. We were able to trade Pokemons, but like only from blue to silver because of the generational difference. We couldn't transfer generation 2 Pokemons to blue. So we had some limitations, but we still had our fun the way we could. And then eventually, of course, we did get Crystal, which could trade between them. Do have Duke Nukem. I don't remember too much. I think I got this second hand, and the cartridge it's like coming apart as well. Maybe it's not even original, I don't know, but it's something in my collection to show. So yeah, that was the Game Boy Color. This is what I started out with, my baby. A little more obscure thing, possibly you've never seen this before, but I do have the Cougar Boy, the original Cougar Boy. You might be wondering, what is a Cougar Boy? Those of you who are watching from North America, even watching from North America, you might not know what this is, but for those of you who are from my generation, might know this as the Mega Duck. It is the same device as the Mega Duck, but here in South America, it was licensed as the Cougar Boy. It was licensed by a company here in South America, and they did start to produce them here in Brazil as well under the name of Cougar Boy. I'm not sure if the game library were exactly the same. I'm sure they had very similar libraries, but I'm not sure if all of them were the same. I don't know if there were any exclusives to their versions, but the Cougar Boy, as you can see, it is much bigger. It was made to be a contestant to the Game Boy DNG. You can see it has very similar form factor. The buttons looks like Tic Tacs. Very weird, very uncomfortable, but bulky and heavy. It was pretty good. It did take 4 AA's. I did put them to try. I think my batteries are not working. This used to turn on, but like the LCD was very weak. I couldn't see very well. So, you know, even if the batteries are working, I won't be able to see very well. I do have to open this up and check it out. I do think this is one of the ones that were getting rusty even 5 years ago. So I can only wonder how it is right now. Cool thing is that it had dials. You can see it says volume here. This was the volume dial, which is pretty cool. And there was a contrast dial here, so you could make things darker or lighter with this. The on and off switch was here. Yeah, I don't think there's any battery left in that. And I'm not certain what this was. It is a 6-volt thing, so maybe you could play without batteries by connecting. I'm not too sure. And here it says there is like an external connector, but I'm not too sure what that is. I don't think it comes off. But yeah, 1992 Creatonic. 1992. That's probably older than most of my viewers here. But yeah, you know, it's pretty cool. Model number WG108. The sticker is powdery, becoming dust of how old this is. High resolution dot matrix LCD, super stereo sound. It was just one sound here, but you know, it was okay. I can't really show you now because it's not turning on, but you know, it was okay. The buttons were very hard. I actually liked this. But I did get this once I was older. When I was younger, I did not even know this existed. As I grew older and started to collect some of the handhelds, I did get this for my collection. And I did mention about the game library. This was fairly short-lived, so it didn't have too many games. This is what the cartridge looked like. As you can see, it did look like some of the Game Boy ones, but in fact I think the size was pretty similar too. It's just that where the Game Boy one kept the connector part protected inside, the Cougar Boy kept it outside for whatever reason, to save on plastic maybe, I don't know. And this is a 4-on-1 game. But to show you, I do have possibly the entire collection, entire library of the Cougar Boy games that were released here in Brazil at least. I think I'm missing one. If I remember correctly, I was missing just one game. Now I don't remember which one it is because it's been a few years. But you can see here, Snake Roy, Cougar Boy. This was one of the funner games, I'll give you that. The name was weird, but yeah, Snake Roy. The Magic Tower. A lot of these were just like clones of Game Boy games, or maybe even sometimes from like those old cell phone games. Railway, Black Forest Tale. I don't remember how this played actually, but you know. Pile Wonder, this was like you moved the little boxes around. It was okay. Trap and Turn, don't remember how this was, but you know, whatever. Puppet Night. You know, the drawings, the art of these cartridges were pretty well drawn, complex for the time, I guess. The names were pretty interesting as well. It's just that the games were not all that great. Here you go, this is a Mega Duck game. For this one, I was not able to get the Cougar Boy counterpart, but I did get the Mega Duck one. So Suleiman's Treasure, Creatonic. Yeah, so you can see that they are the same handheld because it uses the exact same cartridges. It's just a name that in certain parts of the world is called Mega Duck, and in certain parts of the world is called Cougar Boy. Street Rider, Arctic Zone, another Mega Duck one. Vex, Magic Maze, and the Bomb Disposer. Yeah, so you know, this was an almost complete collection. Like I said, I think I was missing just one from the entire collection. I did used to have all the boxes for this, but I did move around a lot as an adult, so I did have to get rid of a bunch of boxes. I did have to downsize. I did have to get rid of a bunch of stuff, but you know, I did keep these, which, you know, it's fun to look at now as a collector. But like I said, would have been nice to be able to get this working again. but you know, for now, it is what it is. The next one is NeoGeo Color Pocket. I don't have the NeoGeo Pocket. This is the color one. As you can see, the LCD on this got all wrinkly as well. It is the same thing that happened to my Game Boy Color, but years later. And so I do know that it is the same problem. The inside is probably still great, just like my Game Boy Color. This is probably from the heat. I do live in Brazil. It does get quite hot in here, and keeping this in storage during hot days for years can make this happen. And these aren't the only two that have this. So, you know, the environment that they were in that caused that. The biggest thing was the analog. I did love this. It was like a fighting stick, a fighting joystick, right? It was fantastic for fighting games. In fact, the NeoGeo Pocket lines did have quite a few fighting games, so you know, it was really fun. This was, of course, SNK's counterpart to Game Boy Color. It did have quite a few games. I actually do love the library of the NeoGeo Pocket. I do think a lot of them are great. It is just said that it was just not as popular as the Game Boy Color. And it wasn't that it was bad, it was great, it was awesome. It's just that it wasn't very popular. Not many people knew about it. It was obscure, and so kids ended up getting the Game Boy Color mostly for the popularity. But this was a fantastic handheld. As you can see, it had like that horizontal form factor like a Game Boy Advance even back then. Here's where the battery went, and the ergonomic was pretty good for such an early handheld. I did like that quite a bit. And I do have some of the games here still in their cases. As you can see, King of Fighters R2. Like I said, a lot of fighting games in here, and I do think these are great. A lot of fun. I did used to play this quite a bit when I got it. It's just, you know, this happened. And so I did see that on AliExpress, they do sell IPS kits for these. They are quite pricey though. So maybe one day, if I ever become successful, I will give it a try. And I will keep these until then. But you know, for now, I can't really play these anymore. I can emulate them, of course, if I want to, but you know, it is not the same than playing on the original handheld. So King of Fighters R2 was one of my favorites. I did have Sonic Pocket Adventure, and this was one of the better games on here. Of course, this is one of the more popular ones because it is Sonic, but I'm not a huge fan of Sonic, so I had it because it was for the collection, but I didn't play it as much as the others. And this was, I'm not sure if you can see it through the thing, but this was Samurai Showdown 2, another fighting game. Very cool, very awesome. I did have a lot of fun with this as well. I think I put that backwards. Did I put that backwards? There you go. I did have a lot of fun with these fighting games. Again, this stick makes a huge difference when playing fighting games. So good, just so good. I did also have SNK versus Capcom, but this was a card game fight, Card Fighters Clash. So you didn't actually use it as a fighting game. It was a card game for the handheld, so I do like those quite a bit. This was, at the very least, interesting to check out. I did play a bit, not too much as the fighting games, but you know, a bit. And this was my absolute favorite, and it is a prized piece for my collection. This is the Mega Man game. I no longer remember the name in English, but you can see that the cartridge is in Japanese. I'm not sure if it can focus, but it is in Japanese. But when you played it, it did have English. So, you know, us non-Japanese people could still play it and have fun. Like I said, this wasn't very well known, so a lot of the more popular games were in Japanese. There were a few games that came out in North America, but not as many. Definitely a more limited selection than the Japanese ones. Still, a lot of the Japanese ones did have English in them so that you could play. So this was my humble collection for the NeoGeo Pocket, which sadly isn't working anymore. Then next was the Wonderswan Color. Have you heard about this? This was one of my favorite ones as well. I do like this quite a bit. This had a screen burn even before. I think I got it with a slight screen burn as well. So even back then when I turned it on, it was difficult to see unless I had light right on there. But yeah, this was made to go against the Game Boy Advance. In fact, the graphics were par with the Game Boy Advance. It didn't have a backlight though, just like the original Game Boy Advance. It was a pretty cool little device from Bandai. Of course, Bandai doesn't make these kind of handhelds anymore, but you can see the board is still really clean. I do assume it is just the screen. I don't know if you can tell, but it is very darkened here, especially on the corners, which is indicative of burning on the LCD. But yeah, you can see there is a lot of buttons on this, a lot of buttons. So the way you would normally play is this was the D-pad and A and B. There's select and start, power, but these buttons here were so that you could play horizontal games, like, you know, those airplane games that you shoot, like Raiden and stuff like that. So you would move with this, and this would be the buttons to shoot and whatnot. So, you know, it was a pretty nifty and cool handheld as well. I did like this quite a bit. This is the color. There was a non-color version as well. You know, just because it says color, people might think this was made to go against the Game Boy Color and the NeoGeo Pocket Color, but no, this was in the era of the Game Boy Advance. Some of the games for it did come out on the Game Boy Advance as well, so you know, it is pretty powerful, and yet even then it only took one AA battery to power it, which was pretty fantastic. It was, I guess, in some ways more optimized, so very cool, very cool. And they did used to have a lot of limited editions of Wonderswan, so a lot of the collectors did like that quite a bit. There was a Final Fantasy one that I used to really want to have, never got around to it, but you know, it is what it is. There was a connector thing here. I do remember reading about it, but I don't remember now what you would put in this. But you know, it was a very cool handheld with a lot of different gimmicks to it. And I do have a few cartridges for it as well. I do remember having more than these, but this as well was very limited to people who were outside of Japan. And yeah, the game cases were pretty cool too. You can see this does look more like a Game Boy Advance cartridge, so like, you know, pretty similar in form factor, I guess. Those of you who like anime will recognize that. And this one was a horror game, Terrors 2. I never actually played these that much. Like I said, I got it with the screen burning on there. I did mean to mess around with it, to open it up and maybe exchange the screen to a better one, but I never got around to it back then. This was a Gundam SD one. I do like Gundam quite a bit, and this is made from Bandai, who made the handheld, so you know, it was a pretty cool thing to see. First party games. And of course, Final Fantasy 1. The port for this, it was slightly different from the Game Boy Advance one. The Game Boy Advance one, of course, they had the 1 and 2 put together, the Dawn of something maybe. I don't remember the name. If you looked at the screenshot comparisons, they were quite different. It wasn't just a port. And the Wonderswan one was seen by most as the superior port. So, you know, it is what it is. Mine is even in Japanese, but you know, it is what it is. This, for me, was more as a collection piece, like the Cougar Boy. Wasn't something that I played on a lot, like the NeoGeo Pocket and the Game Boy. And now, going back to this, the Game Boy Advance SP. Now, this particular one was the very first one that my brother got me, and I still have it. It was working until very recently, like last year, I remember playing on it. But then, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it does have that exact same wrinkling problem as the NeoGeo Pocket and the Game Boy Color. So, you know, it's sad to see. These are probably harder to exchange the screen because you do have to open all the hinges and stuff. But, you know, it is not impossible. I have seen the IPS mods for these as well. So that's why I am keeping this in case one day I can't afford those to do the mods myself, to keep this alive, because like I said, along with the Game Boy Color, these other ones I did get it when I was older, but the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance SP, this particular one, I did get them when I was younger, so this is what I grew up playing, so I do miss that quite a bit. As for the games for it, I no longer seem to have my little case that had my favorite games. Maybe it got stolen, but the only one that actually survived from back then was WarioWare Twisted, which this too, that same friend that gave me the Mega Man Extreme, yeah, he brought it back. He didn't bring it back specifically for me actually, he brought it back for himself, and then eventually when he sold his Game Boy Advance, he gave this one to me because I liked it quite a bit. So yeah, This was very fun. It had motion sensor on it, so you had a ton of little mini games that you would move your Game Boy Advance around. So it was very different for back then and very cool as well. I do have this German cartridge of Sacred Heart. I did beat Sacred Hearts in English, and then when I spent time in Germany, I did pick this one up just because I used to like the game a lot and it was nostalgic. But you know, it is in German, so it is what it is. And I do apparently have FIFA. FIFA 2006 soccer, which is interesting because I despise, if there's one thing I despise, is sports games. I think they're the biggest scam in video game industry. They're mostly the same. It's boring. It is what it is. I think I got this in a lot with the other Game Boy Advance SPs that I got, which, speaking of which, I do have these two tribal Game Boy Advance SP. This one, the battery got bloated, so I did have to take it out. And of course, as you can see, I did get it used. Someone with the initials LU maybe was the owner of this. You can see there is burning on the LCD here as well. So it is pretty sad, but this used to be a limited edition shell, so I am keeping this around. I did get this when I was in college, and it came with a bunch of games like that. Mostly my friends and I were using these to have Pokemon battles with each other, because if you saw on this, I do have the Super Card, the Mini SD Super Card with a random Django Fett on the back, and this was one of the earlier flashcards for the Game Boy Advance. This was not one of the good ones though. This was one of the earlier ones. It had a Mini SD on it too, not the micro SD. So I did put a Mini SD adapter with the micro SD. And the game, to put the games in here, you had to encrypt it in a particular format. So, you know, it wasn't too fun. It was very limited, but for the time, it is what we had. So we did have a lot of fun with that. This one actually is still working. Let me see if I can get it to turn on for you. You can see the light is still pretty weak though. Not find SD, please turn off GBA. Okay, so the Super Card on this one is a bit finicky, I guess. Let's see if we can get it to boot so I can show you. See, this is a Mini SD, and the Mini SD, you know, it was very short-lived as well. It was in between the SD and the micro SD, and it was very short-lived, but you know, it is what it is. Quite a few Chinese handhelds use this even in 2014, 2015. I assume it's because they had a lot of these left, so they just was cheaper for them to use. So let's go. Let's try it again. And now it didn't even recognize the cartridge. Let me get this turned on and then I'll get back to you.
2,000 years later.
Okay, so I did get it to boot. If you see, I did have quite a few games in there. Zone of the Enders, Zelda Minish Cap, Yu-Gi-Oh! 2006. We did used to play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Together in college as well. Age reunion. It is important to note that these weren't new even in college. Like, people were playing with 3DSs back then, but we were over there. We were there playing with the SP. But yeah, Super Robotism was one of my favorites. Summon Knight, definitely one of my favorites. Street Fighter Alpha 3, very cool. Yeah, there was a lot of cool stuff in here. Shiny Soul was fantastic to play together with other people. Riviera Pokemon. Yeah, so we did mostly play Pokemon Leaf Green and Fire Red and battle each other and whatnot. But you know, I did have all this to play through, and back then it was fantastic. There were almost no flashcards back then, so you know, something like this, as janky as it was pretty fantastic to have. You can see I did have more than 56 games, more than 64 games. 64 games, yeah, I had 64 games in this. I just put everything in there all at once as I encrypted and put it in that specific format. If you tell me to do it now, I won't remember. It was such a long time ago, but you had to have its specific program from SuperCard, which you had to download from a very weird, sketchy site from China. But you know, I do appreciate it having this back then. Game Boy Advance SP is still one of my favorite handhelds, even to just hold. But yeah, I do love Game Boy Advance games. They were probably my favorite handheld era. But yeah, those were my SPs. After that, I did get my PSP 3000 Vibrant Red. This, just like DSP and the Game Boy Color, this was the one I got. I bought it brand new way back when. This was my baby, and what a fantastic handheld. This was the first handheld in which I thought, wow, I can play console games in here. Of course, it wasn't quite the same, but it was a huge jump from the Game Boy Advance, which was the last thing that I had played, to the PSP. So I did get this PSP, of course, before the college SPs, of course. I was still in middle school, high school, somewhere around there. This does still work. I just don't know if the battery is still there. The original battery got bloated, so I did have to get rid of it. So I did get a third-party battery, but the third-party battery does unload really quickly. As you can see, I did put Henkaku on it. The speakers are a little busted, I think, but for the most part, it works. So yeah, I did mod this, but I only modded it like once I was an adult already, because back when I first got it, the modding scene was a little janky. I didn't have a lot of space here, so I only put like stuff that I hadn't beaten yet. So, I mean, I did beat Maverick Hunter X, because as you know, I do love Mega Man, but for the other games, I did put games that I hadn't beaten it just so that I would play around with it later on. Metal Slug, of course, I did beat it, but you know, it's just there for fun. And of course, Game Boy Advance emulator. I think even now, the PSP is such a fantastic handheld. If you mod it, you can emulate a ton. Until a few years back, getting a modded PSP was better than buying an emulation handheld back then, because those could only play up to PS1, and the PS1 you couldn't play very well, even if you put like custom firmware on it to make it better. And even overclocking those, you would only get like 13 frames per second on the PS1 games, but the PSP could play PS1 natively. So, you know, it was a fantastic thing to have. I still keep mine because of that, because it's such a lovely handheld. Holding it, the bigger screen, vibrant colors, it was just overall such an amazing handheld to have. That said, towards the end of high school, I did also get gifted this. Of course, it is no longer working. The battery got bloated, so I had to take it out. But even before that, there were a ton of dead pixel lines on both screens. The speakers weren't working anymore. I think either X or Y was not working too well. A lot of stuff was wrong with this. If you see, the screw tabs came off because it melted onto the plastic, because like I said, it is really hot here. But this was gifted to me by that same friend who got me the Mega Man Extreme and WarioWare. He moved on from he sold his SP, and then he got this Nintendo DS when he went to the States again. And then when we were in high school, he was no longer playing with this around anymore. He thought about selling it, and then he saw that I really liked the DS. I didn't own a DS back then, never played any of it, but he did let me play around with it because we used to live in the same house for high school. And we did order an R4. You can see this was one of the early R4s, 1.4. But with this, we did play a ton of games that we never could. The DS Zeldas, you can see it is a 4GB one, and 4GB back then was really big. We went all out on this, 4GB. We went all out so that we could put a ton of games here to play. And you know, it was fantastic. This is how I played through the Phoenix Wright games, the DS Pokemon games. You know, it was all through this little guy. So, you know, it is very sentimental value, even though it is out of all of these, this is the most busted handheld that I have, but still, it is one that I love considerably. So yeah, it's here. And then in college, I had the SPs like I told you. And then, you know, everything else I got it after I graduated college. I did have these PSP Go's. I have two of them. One of them I did get run over while having this in my pocket, and so it won't turn on anymore. I should open it to see what's up. I never tried to open this one before. I did switch the back plate only, but yeah. And this black one was working even until last year. In fact, that Maverick Hunter, I did beat on this. I did have a bunch of emulators for Super Nintendo stuff as well. This was the emulation handheld to have because it was not only very pocketable to carry around everywhere, but because he had the innards of a PSP, he could play PSP games fine. Once modded, dude, you could play all the PSP games, all the PS1 games, and then emulate every single Super Nintendo games, Game Boy Advance games, and everything below that perfectly fine. So, it was the handheld to have, and this was working fine, but then last month it stopped charging. So I'm not sure what that is all about. I do have to open both of these up one day to see if it's something that I can fix, because these, like the PSP 3000, these are such fantastic handhelds. Just that whole flipping mechanism thing, fantastic. I do love it. But yeah, currently both PSP Go's not working, which is super sad, but keeping them around because, maybe one day when I'm feeling inspired, I will open them up and try it. And then we do have the DS Lite, and this too I got second hand. You can see that it was pretty roughly used. I did get this for pretty cheap. The cool thing is that it does have the rumble pack. So, I thought that was neat. I do like that quite a bit. And interestingly enough, I bought it here in Brazil, but apparently this was from someone from Korea brought this over and then sold it, and then probably passed around to many different hands before it got to mine. The buttons are fine. The screen, I think they had opened this before, because if you see, there's some specks, some dust specks, but this is inside the screen, like it's underneath the screen. So they probably had opened this up before, which might explain the problems that he has. This one as well is not charging. It was working completely fine, and then just one day it stopped charging. And for a long time I thought it was my charger, but I did replace the charger and still it wouldn't charge. So yeah, I do have this again in hopes that one day I will open it and then be able to fix whatever is wrong with it, because everything else was fine. And I do think the DS Lites were fantastic. You could play Game Boy Advance games on here. Yeah, you could play Game Boy Advance games on here. So we don't see backward compatibility on handhelds that much anymore. So I do think this is one of the cooler handhelds to have. So that's why I keep this around. And of course I do also have the DSi, which is a fantastic. You can see that I have another R4. This was much newer, but I got that cartridge when I was working, so I had money to spend. This particular handheld though, my brother got it for me refurbished from GameStop when I went to visit him in the States at some point. And the DSi I think is fantastic because like you could go on the internet and whatnot, but also it was the first Nintendo handheld that had a SD card slot, which I don't have anything there apparently. I used to, but I'm not sure where that went. But the cool thing about that is that you can mod it so that you can run games off of the SD card. Of course, I do have DR4, so I don't really feel the necessity to do that. But it was there for people who wanted to, and that made this such a fantastic handheld. Very versatile as well, very cool. And the clamshell designs, you just gotta love it. And then once I started working, the very first thing that I bought was the new 3DS XL. This is probably what I spent most of my time on handhelds with. I did mod this even before the modding scene was big on this. I did have a Sky 3DS cartridge. I don't have it with me right now to show you, but I did have the Sky 3DS cartridge that had the button on there that switched games around with that. To mod this, we had to go through like Cubic Ninja to flash and stuff. It was very complicated. We jumped through a lot of hoops to pirate stuff. This was my baby. I did use this from like 2015 until 2020. When COVID hit, this one died. The power button kept pressing by itself, so it would turn on and turn off, turn on and turn off. And then one day it just wouldn't turn on anymore. Even when I put it on charger, it wouldn't turn on anymore. I do have a lot of saved stuff in here as well, so I'm not throwing it away. But I don't play it on it anymore because it doesn't turn on anymore, which is super sad. But also, if you see, it was the red one, but the red ones, at least here in Brazil, had this issue that they were peeling like crazy. It was crazy. It was like some kind of skin disease looking thing, but the red would peel a ton. I'm not sure if you can see very well on the camera. I don't think you can, but yeah, it used to happen this to the shell. And apparently a lot of this that had this paint issues also had problems with the insides. So yeah, I didn't have much issue with everything else until that power button issue started to happen. But it is what it is. I did put this shell on. My brother got it for me when he came back from a business trip to the States as well. It's still one of my favorite things. Holding it does feel very nostalgic now, but alas, I'm not playing this because it doesn't work anymore. That said, I did eventually get a used OG 3DS, and it's very pink, but this is what I used to play on in place of this. Of course, it wasn't the same, but it is what it is. Oh, here you go. The Sky 3DS was on that pink one. So yeah, it was very janky looking. You press the buttons to switch the games on there, kind of like the MIG switch now. You can see Optimus Prime on there for whatever reason, but you know, it was jank, but we used to love it. But yeah, all the 3DSs, I did mod them, and I used to have a lot of fun with that. I used to put custom themes on there, some music, and of course a ton of games. You can see this one has the Kirby theme on it. I don't know if it... Yeah, there was the Kirby music as well, but I'll leave it off. But yeah, I did have quite a few games on this. This too, I didn't put all the cool games on here because in my mind, I was going to fix this eventually and go back to that. So I put the games that I mostly didn't play on this one. But yeah, this is still something that I play from time to time today. But then of course, there were some games that the OG 3DS couldn't play because of the lesser hardware compared to the new ones. So I did eventually get the new 2DS, and this could play everything that the new 3DS XL could. It's just that it doesn't have the 3D function. And as you can see, this one I didn't bother with the theme because again, I was under the impression at the time that I was going to be able to fix this and go back to it. But yeah, over here you can see that I do have a lot more games, Mario stuff, all the Harvest Moon stuff, Fire Emblem stuff, a bunch of RPGs, and so on. But yeah, 3DS is definitely one of my favorite handhelds because once you modded it, you could practically do anything with it. Like before, when this worked, I used to stream this onto my computer, and I used to stream on Twitch with that Monster Hunter stuff. So yeah, it was a fun time. It was great. That said, the game selection, I do feel like the original DS and the Game Boy Advance had a better library of games overall. But you know, 3DS came pretty close. I definitely did enjoy that quite a bit. Oh, and I kind of forgot. So going back in the timeline a little bit, while I was in Germany, I did pass by a GameStop once, and I did win this giveaway for a Vita. But back then I was a poor student, so I didn't have any games for it. I do still have the games that I had for it here. So the game that came on it, it was that bundle of the All-Star Battle Royale. Not sure if you can see. But yeah, the PlayStation All-Star Battle Royale, before Battle Royale games were a thing. And this was like Smash Bros, but for PlayStation games. And that was the game that came with it. So I did play this quite a bit, and eventually I did get Dungeon Hunter Alliance. This was actually originally an iPhone game, and in fact I did beat the first game on the iPhone, but this was the cheapest game that you could get on the Vita. So as a poor student, I did get this just to have like an RPG experience on the Vita, because as most of you know, RPGs are my favorite kind of games. And then once I started to work, I did get the Sword Art Online Last Song, which is not the greatest Sword Art Online game, but it was the cheapest back then, so that's what I went for. But I didn't get to play much of these. Like I said, I didn't have many games for the Vita, and even the Vita back then wasn't too popular. Even Sony themselves didn't really get into it, so I mostly just let it be. I wanted to play on it, but I didn't have anything to play on it. But then on like 2017, 2018, they did come out with custom firmware for this, so I did install the firmware back then, and then I installed a few games on it, and then like I said, I was unavailable mentally and physically for some time. So mostly this sat in storage with everything else, but I recently came back to it, realized there were a lot of games that I could put on it, even like things like Borderlands 2, Stardew Valley, which is fantastic. And if you think about it, the Vita came out in like 2012, and you could play things like Borderlands 2, Stardew Valley. So like Sony did say they wanted to bring a console experience to the Vita, and I think for the most part they were successful. It's just that they didn't market it very well, they didn't support it very well, and so it just died. But you know, it really was an amazing handheld, and even more so now with people making homebrews and ports for this, it is becoming even better and possibly even more popular than it ever was before. So yeah, I do have this. I do play through Stardew Valley and some other stuff here in my free time. It also had a touch back here, which was pretty cool. Not many games that I play use it, but you know, it was there for if you wanted to. There is a case that uses that touch function to give it a L2 R2 on this so that you can emulate other games with it, or you know, even stream games with this. If you had a PS4, you could stream that onto this to play. So if you had a L2 and R2, that made it pretty good and have like a PlayStation Portal experience, but way earlier than that. But yeah, aside from that, my latest official hardware handheld is of course the Nintendo Switch. This is V2, it's not the OLED, it is not V1, it is the V2. And I know these are huge nubbins that I put on there, but recently on this I do mostly just play Disney Speedstorm. And you know, racing with this big thumb rest have been comfortable for the most part. But it is on this Switch that I streamed Zelda Breath of the Wild. Not too often, but you know, sometimes. But also Monster Hunter Rise, and more importantly, Monster Hunter Stories 2, which is how my Twitch channel grew the most, with Monster Hunter Stories 1 on the 3DS and the Monster Hunter Stories 2 on the Switch. I did use this quite a bit, and then both analogs got drifts pretty bad, and so for a while I didn't play with this that much. But then recently a Nintendo licensed tech support place appeared, and they did replace the Joy-Cons for me for free. And since then I have been booting up Switch to see if I want to play anything. And of course this isn't modded, so I don't have a ton of games on it. I do have a few things. Pokemon Sword, I did beat through it. Like all of these bigger games, I did beat through them already. And so I did install a bunch of free-to-play ones just to see if I wanted to play around with it. But for now, Disney Speedstorm has been fun, especially because it has cross-platform and cross-save. So I can play with my friends who are playing on Steam or PlayStation or whatever, and I can play this on the bed, and still when I go on my Steam, the progress will be saved. So, you know, fantastic little card game, of course, very different from Mario Kart, but you know, a card game nonetheless if you want to get into something like that. And yeah, guys, that was all of my official hardware handheld collection. As you saw, sadly, a lot of them are not working. A big part of it was, of course, my fault for being a little negligent, but also, you know, when you live in a place like I do, it's difficult to deal with all that. But yeah, as you can see, most of the ones that I do still play are the ones that have been modded or that have a flash card so that I can play all the games. If there are any particular ones that you would like to see more of, or to see me try a particular game on, then you know, let me know in the comments down below. I'll see if I can get that going for you to test some stuff out if you want. Try some different moddings or homebrews or whatever. But yeah, that's all I had to say for now. Like I mentioned, I do have quite a few emulation handhelds as well, though they are much older. Like I said, from 2018 onwards, I wasn't fully here in my mind. So anything after that, I didn't get into. But a lot of the old ones before that, I do have. So, you know, it could be interesting to take a look at how some of the older handhelds were and whether they still hold up today. So, you know, that is a series of videos that I plan on doing. But leave a like if you enjoyed this video, consider helping this channel out by clicking join down below, subscribe to see more videos like this or other collection videos that I usually do, and of course, always nerd on.